There's a smell that doesn't leave you. Not spoiled food, not trash, not mildew. It's something else. It's the kind of smell that tells you the truth before anyone says a word. And on October 3rd, 2018, that smell was coming from a home. People were looking for Jermaine Ross. He was a barber and he had missed appointments. And if you know anything about barbers, you know this. They don't just miss appointments and no one notices. Someone went to check on him. And when they got there, they saw the windows covered in flies. Not one or two, enough flies to make you stop before you even touch the door. Detectives arrived, and at first, they didn't immediately notice that it was a homicide because there was no struggle, nothing was ransacked, nothing obviously violent. But once forensic stepped inside, everything changed. Jermaine's body was lying on the right side of the home. He was unclothed, and the smell of death filled the room. And then there was something else. A coffee table, a can of Ajax. And the Ajax cleaner had been dusted over Jermaine's crotch. It was also found on the deadbolt and the interior lock. Like someone didn't just want Jermaine gone. They wanted to erase what happened after. This is Murder in the Black, and today we're talking about the murder of Jermaine Ross. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to Murder in the Black. It's your host, Steph. Thank you for being here and pressing play. Let's go ahead and get into our true crime case for today. Jermaine Ross was a barber. And I want to pause right there because a barber isn't just a job. A barber is community. People talk in that chair. People vent. People come in heavy and leave lighter. Jermaine was known. His nephew, Michael Ross, described him as a good person. The youngest in the family, always helping people, and Jermaine loved cutting hair. Even after his barbershop burned down, he didn't stop. He cut hair out of his home and went to his clients' houses. He cut hair for the neighborhood kids for free. People didn't just come for haircuts, they came to hang out. His shop was described as the people's barbershop. But the last conversation Jermaine had with his nephew wasn't good at all. Jermaine admitted he was having problems with people in the neighborhood. He said he kept a gun on him just in case someone got reckless. And then he said something that stuck. He said he wasn't afraid to die. And 2 months later, Jermaine was dead. And his nephew began to replay that conversation over in his mind. Did Jermaine know something? Or was he just living in a world where being ready feels like survival? On October 2018, Jermaine was found dead inside his home on Elm Street. People went to check on him because he missed appointments. When they arrived, they noticed that smell. And they also saw flies all over the window. Detectives and forensic arrived, and at first, one detective believed the death could have just been natural causes because nothing inside the home looked disturbed. We often talk about on Murder in the Black if the house looks ransacked, if the furniture is tossed over and everything looks out of place, then the suggestion would be theft. But inside of Jermaine's home, no drawers were pulled out. No furniture was overturned. There was no sign of obvious struggle. But once forensic entered the home, that theory didn't hold. Jermaine was lying on the right side when you walked in. He was unclothed, and the smell of decomposition filled the room. Quick pause just in case you're locked in right now. I want to make sure that you're subscribed to Murder in the Black and you press that bell icon so that you can keep up on our updates. For exclusive episodes and subscriber-only content, consider becoming a paid subscriber. Here's a little nugget. We have a 3-day free trial on Apple Podcasts just in case you want to figure out the lay of the land first before you commit. Storytime with Steph is back. That is where I present many true crime stories you won't always hear on our main feed, but the stories deserve to be told. You can watch that on whatever social media platform you enjoy us on. But I especially want those of you who are on TikTok to know that I'm back, and this is where we started our Murder in the Black community. One more quick favor. Make sure you leave a 5-star rating and review if you enjoy the work here. Let's get back into our story. Now, I want to slow down here and talk about the details of decomposition because it really does matter when we're talking about the crime scene and forensics. Decomposition isn't just something that happens after a death, it truly does tell a story. It tells time. Now, when a body decomposes, flies are attracted to the body very quickly, sometimes within hours. They land, they feed, they lay eggs, and those eggs hatch into maggots. The maggots feed, grow, and then the cycle repeats. So, when investigators see heavy fly activity and advanced decomposition, they know something immediately. This person has been sitting for days, not hours, days, which means time passed. Time for someone to leave, time for someone to clean and to think. And decomposition makes investigations harder. Injuries can be harder to see, which would make us believe, if we were detectives, that when they walked in and first saw Jermaine's body, they couldn't see anything on his body. They naturally thought, not just because they didn't see any remnants of theft, but also his body just seemed to be decomposing. It makes it harder to see any bruises. And with time, we know evidence can degrade. The exact time of death becomes harder to pinpoint for investigators. With them not knowing if this was truly natural cause or a homicide, investigators had to order an autopsy. But they also noticed something strange. There was a coffee table that we talked about, and there was that can of Ajax cleaner. Now, the Ajax had been dusted over Jermaine's crotch, and it was also found on the deadbolt and interior lock. Now, this doesn't seem accidental. This seems like somebody was thinking through what they were doing if, in fact, he was murdered. They thought about what they would touch and about what evidence they would leave behind. At that point, investigators knew they had to wait on the autopsy results. They had to figure out, was this a crime scene or wasn't it? The autopsy revealed the truth. They found a bullet projectile that pierced Jermaine's heart. The injury wound was through his buttocks. The bullet traveled upward and struck his heart. Jermaine Ross didn't die naturally, as they once thought. He was shot. His death was ruled a homicide. And with that, investigators returned back to his home and took another look at that crime scene through different lenses. That's when they found a bullet hole coming from the back of the house. Now, the investigation fully began at this point. Now, I want to anchor our timeline because we know dates matter when we're talking about murder. A neighbor later came forward and said that on October 1st, 2018, between midnight and 1 a.m., she heard 2 gunshots. So she went to the back of her house and looked out the window toward Jermaine's house. There were no lights on. She didn't see any vehicles. She went back to bed. Jermaine wasn't found until October 3rd. Just keep that in mind when we're talking about the body decomposition that we just reviewed. So by the time investigators confirmed it was a homicide, which probably was additional days had passed. Investigators are behind the 8 ball. They jump into full swing to solve this murder. As they were investigating, they found out 11 days before Jermaine's death, Jermaine had received insurance money after his barbershop burned down. Now, he spoke openly about the money he received. He told people within the neighborhood and people that would frequent his barbershop. And he also told his sister. He said that he received about $25,000. Now, his older sister felt like, is he telling the truth? My brother has never had a substantial amount of money, and she didn't think he would have received that much. So she just brushed it off. But he did, in fact, receive that amount and was carrying around $10,000 in cash. And he was telling people about it. He was flashing it. Now, I want to talk a little bit about stunting when we talk about this case. Jermaine was telling people, not just his sister, how much he received, but he also had a wad of cash that he was carrying around the neighborhood and telling people about it. And when that happens, people start paying attention. Now, there were rumors that investigators found out that people were trying to rob him, that he had been in a scuffle previously with people in the neighborhood, and there were people that were threatening to harm him. And that was the reason why he kept a gun on him. And this was before he even had the $10,000 in cash that he received. But it seemed that those threats continued, especially when he received those threats. But when Jermaine was found at his home deceased, investigators only found a couple of $100 that was on the couch. So investigators had one big question. Where was that wad of cash that people said they saw him carrying around? Why didn't they find it on scene? Which brings me back to investigators' initial theory. They thought that he died of natural causes. That was proved wrong. And then they also believed that he wasn't robbed. But now they found out more information that suggested that robbery maybe was a motive. Where was the money that Jermaine had on him? Now, investigators tried to filter through several interviews, talk to several different people in the neighborhood who knew Jermaine, but there was no significant information that came up in the course of the early part of the investigation. And so honestly, they kind of hit a dead end fairly quickly. And when you think about that in the grand scheme of their investigation, how they started late, then when they kind of got some momentum, they immediately hit a dead wall. And so they were trying to solve this. But what I will say is that the community of Cahokia stood up for Jermaine. They were willing to come in and speak. And as we talked about last week in our case, where in the Black community, sometimes we are reluctant to speak to the police for obvious and sometimes not so obvious reasons that are warranted. In this particular case, the community loved Jermaine. He was their barber. He was someone that they knew and trusted. And they wanted to see his killer be brought to justice. However, the police didn't find anything significant with the people that they talked to. They were coming up empty handed. That is until a woman named Melinda Graves comes into the police station. Now, when she comes in, she's pretty nervous. She told detectives she had been at Jermaine's house and she was afraid she was going to be accused of killing him. Melinda also claimed she was being threatened by a man in a black car. She didn't know who he was, but he pulled up on her outside of her neighborhood and says, I know that you were with Jermaine the night he died, and you better hand over that money that I know you got from him. If you don't, I'm going to go to the police and I'm going to tell them you killed him. She came to the police station in an effort to clear her name. She didn't want the rumor mill that sometimes happens in these situations to reach detectives. And so she wanted to talk to them to tell them what she knew. So they readily sat down and listened to her account. Melinda said she had been hanging out Saturday night with her friend Jasmine Madison. She claimed that they walked from Jasmine's house to Jermaine's house, which was a short distance. They partied, so they drank some liquor, smoked some cigarettes, watched TV, chilled, and eventually they left. And when they left, he was still alive. Now, Belinda was adamant she and Jasmine did not kill Jermaine. Investigators listened to the story and they have to investigate it. So naturally, they have to speak to the other person who was at the house with Melinda, and that was Jasmine. But they can't find Jasmine. Now, Jasmine lived very close to Jermaine, but she wasn't there. And they began to ask about her, seek her out, but they couldn't find her. And so naturally, the question becomes, where is Jasmine? Is she hiding? Did she have something to do with Jermaine's disappearance? Did she have something to do with Jermaine's death? Or was she a part of his death? Or could it be possible that as a result of her being there, maybe she was threatened and harm. Now, while the investigators searched for answers, Jermaine's family was grieving. Jermaine was cremated, and his older sister received his ashes. This part of the story is interesting to me, a detail that I want to make sure I highlight. Now, Jermaine used to say when he was alive that if he ever died, he would come back and get his sister in a playful way, not to haunt her, but to taunt her like your younger brother would. Upon receiving his ashes, his older sister said there was a fly in her house that just wouldn't go away. And the family believed that it was Jermaine. That was something that he would do: taunt, laugh, be a nuisance. And that's what that fly was to his older sister. Investigators could not track down Jasmine. They didn't know where she was. And they started to believe that either she was hurt or she was evading them. So they needed to sit down with Melinda again. They bring her back to the police station. And once again, she's very nervous, fidgety, and scared. But as they recount the details that she initially gave, Melinda changes her story. She said she and Jasmine walked to Jermaine's home, and that remained the same. They drank, they smoked, but at some point during the evening, Jermaine came out of his bedroom and showed them a wad of money. Now, Melinda said that eventually he goes back into his bedroom and puts the money back, and then she decides that she's going to go to the restroom. When she comes back, Jermaine and Jasmine are hooking up. And if you're not hooking up, means they were having sex. She decided she didn't want to be a part of that situation and decided to just start looking around the house. And she made her way into Jermaine's room. And she started to look for his money. Now, she admitted to detectives that she was indeed hitting the lick. She was trying to come up for real. She was trying to come up on a come up, if you get what I mean. She said she was desperate and she just wasn't stealing for Jermaine for no reason. According to her, her reasoning was because her house had burned down and she was taking care of her 12-year-old brother, so she needed money for a deposit on a new home. But she said she couldn't find his money. After looking and presuming that they were done having sex, she eventually joined them again in the living room. And that's when she said Jermaine made a call for cocaine. 5 to 7 minutes later, a man came into the door without knocking, and she presumed that was the drug dealer. The man demanded money. Jermaine pointed towards the coffee table where the money that he was going to give him in exchange for the cocaine was sitting. He said, well, the money's here. And the man said, where is all the money? Implying that wad of cash that he had in the back. Then before she knew it, the drug dealer pulls out a gun and shoots Jermaine. At that point, Melinda says her and Jasmine get out of the house as quickly as possible and they don't look back. They don't call the police because they're scared, but she said on the way out, she saw a black 4-door car with a dent on the passenger side. She said she feared this drug dealer and she didn't want him to find her. And that's why she didn't speak up earlier. Maybe that's why her story changed. Now, investigators didn't know what to think. They didn't know if they should believe Melinda or not. I mean, you have to ask yourself, this person is the only witness who has came forward on their own to give us information, but her story is changing. Changed stories usually mean one of two things: fear or guilt. And it seemed that she was pretty scared. And also, you add in that they did not have Jasmine to talk to. Well, this is a sticky situation. So it really had no other choice but to fully investigate this new story. With the car description, investigators go back to Jermaine's neighborhood and canvass the area. They ask questions and they pull surveillance footage. On the surveillance footage, they find a car that matches the description Melinda gave. And they find that car in the neighborhood, and pay the young man who owned the car a visit. They bring him down to the station and they find out that he knows Jasmine. And they really believe this could possibly be their shooter because not only did he know Jasmine, he also knew Jermaine. But according to him, while he knew Jermaine, he didn't know Jermaine, if you get what I mean. He knew of him, but he never talked to him. He didn't know him personally. And pretty much the same was true for Jasmine. He said on the night of the murder, he was at home asleep. And when they checked out his alibi, it checked out. And just because he knew Jasmine in passing, Cole was a small city and most people knew everybody. That really wasn't the guilt factor that they initially thought. They were once again back at square one. Meanwhile, another witness came forward and they said Jermaine had fallen on hard times. Now, you remember I said at the beginning that Jermaine's barbershop had burned down, and that means limited clientele. All the people that will be coming into your place of business, now either you have to come see them or you have to do it out of your home. And so that means limited amount of clients, which means limited funds. And because of that, he just didn't have the money that he once had. He was struggling. And he didn't have running water at the time that he was shot and killed. He was receiving that insurance money really so that he could get back on his feet. Now, eventually, investigators located Jasmine through relatives. She had outstanding warrants and an overall fear of talking to police. But once she found out that she could come in and they wouldn't arrest her, she agrees to talk. And her story is different. Jasmine said she and Melinda walked to Jermaine's house. She said she had an ongoing romantic relationship with him. She admitted that she did know about the money. She said Jermaine brought it out and showed them, just like in Melinda's account, and eventually they began to have sex. She then says Melinda comes out of the back room after they had sex with Jermaine's handgun. And Melinda wanted the money, and Melinda shot him twice. Now, Jasmine said Melinda told her to pour a cleansing agent on Jermaine's genital area and legs. She said she was so shook by the situation and spooked out that she grabbed her clothes and ran out of the house naked. Now, investigators needed to figure out whose story were they going to believe. Melinda, who by this time has changed her story twice, or Jasmine. But they were in that interview room with Jasmine talking to her about her story for a while. And they were able to determine that she stayed consistent with her story. They needed to vet Jasmine's story because they found her story to be the more believable one. Later, witnesses confirmed that Melinda was spending large amounts of money after Jermaine was killed. And so the theory that she robbed Jermaine and then killed him started to make sense. Now, you guys remember I said that Melinda had a 12-year-old brother who was the whole reason, according to her, that she hit the lick in the first place. Well, they bring in her 12-year-old brother and talk to him. They need to see what he knows. Melinda's younger brother said he overheard Melinda and Jasmine talking about going over to Jermaine's on Saturday night to take his money. He said they took the Metrolink to St. Louis and they had the gun in a lunchbox and that it was disposed of near the Ark grounds. That filled in the missing pieces for investigators. There was a scheme set up by Todd. Yeah, I'm sorry, I had to throw that in there. But back to our story. But there was a scheme set up by Melinda and Jasmine to rob Jermaine. And now they knew that with the gun, Jermaine's gun that he had, she shot him and then disposed of the gun. So with Jasmine's story and her 12-year-old brother's story, they had Melinda right where they wanted her. So they bring her back in for another interview and they confront her with the facts. She breaks down and she admits that, yes, she shot Jermaine. She says she panicked and she was worried about losing her brother. And so after confessing, she just wanted to know how much time am I going to get? But the reality of the situation is if you were really concerned about your brother, why would you ever do that in the first place? Right? But her explanation and confession really hit home with me because there was no remorse. It was like, yeah, I did it. I panicked. I shot him. So how much time am I going to get so that I can be back with my brother? Because I don't want to have to leave my brother. She was not concerned about the life she took. For her, that was expendable. Now, the money that she stole from Jermaine was never recovered. The weapon was never found. Melinda Graves was charged with first-degree murder. She pled guilty and received 25 years to life. Jasmine Madison pled guilty to obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence. Takeaway: Jermaine didn't do anything criminal. He didn't live recklessly. He was a barber, a helper, a fixture in his community. But somewhere along the way, private information stopped being private. People knew. They knew that he received insurance money. He had cash on him. He was rebuilding after losing his shop. And once that information circulated, it changed how people saw him, not as a person, not as a neighbor, but as an opportunity. That's the part we don't talk about enough. Oversharing doesn't always happen online. Sometimes it happens in real life, in familiar spaces with people we think are safe. But when too many people know your business, you lose control over who's listening. And in Jermaine's case, that loss of control made him a target. Now, this isn't about blaming him. It's about recognizing how quickly desperation, entitlement, and proximity can turn information into danger. Jermaine was generous. He opened his space. He trusted people. And that trust was exploited by those who did not respect it. So the lesson here isn't be closed off. No, it's be intentional. Not everyone needs to know your finances, your struggles, your next move, because some people don't hear vulnerability, they hear access. And Jermaine Ross paid the ultimate price for that access. His story is a reminder that privacy is protection, and guarding your personal information isn't secrecy. It's survival. Before we go, if this story stayed with you, please support the work. Subscribe to Murder in the Black on YouTube for full episodes. Make sure you press that bell icon so you can receive all of our updates. Join us on Substack for behind-the-scenes notes and community discussion. And don't forget, Storytime with Steph drops weekly with cases you don't always hear on our main platform. Thank you for listening. Until next time, this is Murder in the Black. Thank you.